Right. Good evening. My name is Lilly Schneider. I'm a second-year law student at the University of Michigan, and it is my honor to introduce the Barbara K. Olson Memorial Lecture and our distinguished speaker, Judge Andrew Oldham. Barbara Olson devoted her life to the principles of liberty, limited government, and the rule of law. Though her life was tragically cut short on September 11th, 2001, her example continues to stand as a model of conviction and courage. For many young women in the law, particularly conservative women in legal higher education, Barbara Olson represents the kind of role model that we aspire to emulate. What matters is not how many conservative women there are in the legal profession, but the quality of those who lead with intellect and integrity. Barbara Olson was one of those women. Her legacy reminds us that standing firm in one's beliefs while engaging others with respect and civility is not only possible, but essential to the health of our legal and civic institutions. Our speaker this evening, the Honorable Andrew Oldham, embodies many of those same principles. Judge Oldham serves on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Before his appointment, he had a distinguished career in public service, including serving as general counsel for Governor Greg Abbott. He was also a law clerk for Justice Samuel Alito on the United States Court of Appeals and for Judge David Santel on the DC Circuit. And before that, he was a student at Harvard Law. As a student, Judge Oldham joined the Federalist Society because, in his words, quote, "It was a unique place for free speech and open debate, one of the only such places at Harvard Law School." Those words resonated with me. In an increasingly polarized academic climate, where open debate is often discouraged for fear of cancellation or social ostracization, the Federalist Society has remained a small oasis of free speech. It is a place where students can debate, discuss, and disagree, sometimes vigorously, but always maintain respect and friendship. The Federalist Society has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my law school journey. When I came to Michigan, I expected a place where students debated in a true marketplace of ideas. I have found that at the Federalist Society, just as Judge Oldham did years ago as a student at Harvard Law. Beyond his impressive credentials, Judge Oldham is known for his humility, his kindness and respect for his clerks and colleagues, and his reverence for the United States Constitution. His thoughtfulness and depth of reflection, evident in his opinions and public remarks, reflect a genuine respect for the rule of law and a dedication to public service, values embodied by the Barbara K. Olson Memorial Lecture Series. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Judge Andrew Oldham.
Good evening, everyone. It is an absolute honor to be here today. I had planned on giving you some remarks tonight, but I've decided to scrap them because today is a very special day, November 7th, which marks the birthday of my esteemed colleague, Jerry Smith, who's here, and also Leonard Leo. So today we're just going to sing happy birthday and be done with the... No, but seriously, please give a round of applause for him. As many of you know, the namesake of this lecture series, Barbara Olson, died in the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. She was en route to Los Angeles to tape an episode of Bill Maher's Politically Incorrect, when terrorists hijacked her plane and flew it into the Pentagon. What you may not remember about that story is that Barbara was supposed to fly to Los Angeles the day before. She changed her flight so that she could spend time with her husband Ted on his birthday, September 11th. Who knows if we would have this lecture series, or what we would call it, if Barbara had kept her original plans and flown on September 10th. So perhaps it's fitting to start tonight with a reflection on a more recent terrorist attack, the one that happened on September 10th, 2025. It has been almost 2 months since Charlie Kirk was assassinated in 4K high-def video. In DC time, 2 months is like 2 millennia. Much ink has been spilled. Many pundits and keyboard warriors have lost their jobs. It's been so long that some of the suspended have been reinstated. And perhaps some of you have moved on, as we so often do in this country, where the news cycles get shorter and shorter and shorter. With all that is going on around us, and with our natural limitations to be troubled by only so many things at once, I can understand how September 10th can fade from focus. But I am not ready to move on for a whole host of reasons, and I would admonish you not to move on either. We are living in an epoch where you can be shot simply for saying conservative things. And it does not matter if you are a college dropout, like Charlie Kirk, or the President of the United States. Healthcare policy debates spill over into sidewalk assassinations. Gun control debates turn into text threads teeming with murderous fantasies. And originalism debates can inspire a would-be assassin to fly across the country with guns, ammo, zip ties, and duct tape to kill a conservative judge and his entire family. And lest you think our legal system is presently equipped to handle these challenges, Justice Kavanaugh's would-be killer got a prison sentence that is more lenient than the average one my circuit doles out for selling drugs. These are fraught times, obviously, and it feels a little surreal to be at a convention dedicated to free and open conversations and debate when conversations can get you shot and debates are laden with rhetoric ripped off from the French Revolution. And it seems like every new week brings a new reminder of the perils of debating just for debate's sake, as if there is no right, no wrong, no good, no evil. So to unpack this, I would like to discuss 3 points with you this evening. First, I want to start with the debates of the past. Second, the perils of the present. And third, the tent for the future. First things first. Like any good originalist, I want to start with the past. In particular, I'd like to talk to you about the role that debate has historically played in the Federalist Society. Now, it's often said that FedSoc is a debating society. If I could see any of you through the cruel and unusual glare of these Klieg lights, I would ask you for a show of hands for how many people have attended a FedSoc debate. And then I would wager you the cost of a new White House ballroom that every hand in the audience would go up. In an age when self-identification is synonymous with reality, it is noteworthy that FedSoc chapters self-identify as debating societies. For example, the student chapter at one law school explains, quote, "The Federalist Society's chief goal is to foster balanced and open debate." Another chapter asserts, quote, "The Federalist Society fosters critical thought and debate about the application of conservative principles found in the law." And the national leadership of this august organization takes numerous steps to encourage and reward its chapters, both student and lawyer, for prioritizing debate events. Now, if you have ever been to one FedSoc debate, you have surely heard the Federalist Society is introduced as legally conservative and libertarian, originalist, words that are often used interchangeably with some imprecision. But in the same breath, the Society's introduction is caveated with an oft-repeated maxim. The Federalist Society does not take positions on policy positions or particular issues. We've heard this latter sentence so often that it has become a mantra, the no positions mantra. When you show up for a FedSoc event anywhere in the country, you might get Chick-fil-A, or you might get a burrito, you might get a fancy dinner like last night, but you'll always get the no positions mantra. So what does it mean? What does it mean to say that we do not take positions on policy questions or particular issues? Well, I want to explore two potential issues, or two potential answers. First, you might hear that mantra and think it means that everything is on the table at a Federalist Society event. Attendees can question everything, from easy stuff, like whether the burger court got it wrong, to even easier stuff, like whether the government can close churches during COVID, to admittedly harder stuff like qualified immunity or whatever. Under this mindset, there is no such thing as a right answer. The debate is an end in and of itself. So it doesn't matter who gets invited, doesn't matter who gets platformed. In some ways, the more controversial, the better. And if we don't really need to settle whether there is a right answer, or even if a right answer exists at all, we can think of this as almost like unprincipled legal relativism. So that's one idea. Another way you might think about it, is you might think a right answer does exist, but that it can only be uncovered through free and unfettered open debate in a marketplace of ideas. This is an important insight that John Milton made in 1644, that John Stuart Mill popularized in 1859, and it is especially important today when we are surrounded by illiberal classmates and illiberal colleagues who think the New York Times has a monopoly on truth. Now, I will challenge anyone in this very crowded room to outcompete me in fondness for Mill and for Milton. And as my wife will tell you, I love a good debate as much as anyone. And one of the best things about this organization is the diversity of its invitees. Indeed, it is hard to imagine any organization anywhere across this country that has more diverse debates and more diverse attendees than the Federalist Society. But I want to pause tonight and ask, what is the purpose of it all? Year after year, we all come to the swamp for NLC. We have panels, we have lots of panels. And sometimes those panels prompt debates. Sometimes those debates are exciting. Sometimes, if you were here last year, you can watch my colleague Edith Jones dunk on Steve Vladeck. But I sure hope that the point of all of this is not just idle entertainment. And I sure hope the point of this great convention is not to pretend that all things are up for debate and that there is no right and wrong. In this world, there is good and there is evil. And in the debate arena, as in all arenas, there are winners and losers. Or at least there should be. Again, FedSoc apparently does not believe in the evolving standards of Eighth Amendment decency, so the cruel and unusual lights will not let me see your hands. And this is a rhetorical question really for the lawyers in the room, less for the law students. But I want you to think about past debates, not so much the present ones, and I'll get to those in a minute. But for the lawyers in the room, think back about your time going to FedSoc panels and events and ask yourselves, how many times have I been in a room where an event seems a little relativistic? That is, panelist A gets up and says a position X, panelist B gets up and says a position Y, there's some light discussion and then adjournment. And there's no real resolution, no real legal or moral clarity. Now, the problem with that is that it doesn't do much to advance any particular legal principle. I mean, how is the hapless 2L supposed to figure out which of those speakers was right? Or if you're out of law school, what is the busy corporate law partner supposed to do with that debate or that panel before she gets on her next 6-minute call? No one ever says, because again, FedSoc doesn't take positions, and hey, let's just have a debate, let it have a conversation, and let the chips fall where they might, right? Now, I do not mean at all, please don't misunderstand me, to chide the society for this event format. In many ways, serving as an originalist or a conservative Chatham House has significant virtues. It gives lawyers, judges, and academics a place to test their ideas. It creates a big tent under which people from various backgrounds can assemble. And it serves as a venue for curious and open-minded students, academics, and lawyers to meet and to learn from one another. That is a real public service. And that public service played a transformative role in my life. As you heard in the introduction, when I arrived at campus as a 1L, I had no exposure to originalism, no exposure to conservative legal thought. And had it not been for the Federalist Society, I might have been otherwise inclined to take at face value the things my teachers were saying. And as anyone in the room who is also a veteran of Elizabeth Warren's contracts class will tell you, that would have been a complete disaster. So I understand that one of the Federalist Society's important roles is serving as a refuge for lawyers and law students, just like it did for me. And if a FedSoc debate is the only place where a disaffected law student or lawyer can hear that Humphrey's executor was wrong, that's a great thing. If a FedSoc event can attract more people by taking no position on whether Lisa Cook is fireable at will, I suppose there's virtue in having a big tent, welcoming everyone and assuming every single come-as-you-are attendee that they do not need to believe anything in particular to be here. But there are also perils in this approach, and I want to talk about 3 of them. Peril number 1, this is not what FedSoc was ever intended to be. As I read the FedSoc's history, the society was never supposed to be just a conservative Chatham House. Now, do not get me wrong, debate was woven into FedSoc's DNA from even before its founding, but debate has always been a means to a different end, namely to restore legal principles that our culture forgot. Debate was never an end in and of itself. As many of you know, FedSoc's story began at Yale, at an institution called the Yale Political Union, or YPU. The YPU is an American analog to 2 of the most storied and famous debating societies anywhere in the world, the Oxford and Cambridge Unions. FedSoc's founders, Lee Lieberman-Otis, David McIntosh, and Steve Calabresi, met at the YPU. Calabresi modeled the first FedSoc chapter on that storied debating society, and his first event, fittingly, was a 1981 debate on Roe versus Wade. And if you believe that Lee, David, and Steve chose that topic or chose a debate because they were agnostic on the results of it, you probably also believe Dr. Fauci. To the contrary, FedSoc's founders chose debates as a means to an end, and that end has always been to promote objective truth and the restoration of legal order. And you do not have to take my word for it. You can consider FedSoc's original charter from 1982. This document was entitled A Proposal to Form a National Conservative Legal Organization. In it, the FedSoc founders explained that the debate focused this way, quote, by encouraging conservatives to present their ideas more articulately and more vocally, an organization of conservative law students could cause others to listen to those views more attentively and perhaps ultimately to question some of the illiberal positions which are being presented as the law, end quote. So yes, debate until you've had your fill, but do not forget that debates have never been ends in and of themselves. Nowhere has this focus been clearer than in Attorney General Ed Meese's famous speech on textualism and originalism. That speech was, in many ways, the conservative legal movement's Declaration of Independence, and it is noteworthy for many reasons. For one, it was not a debate, it was a monologue. And for another, General Meese did not deliver it to the Federalist Society. He delivered it to the American Bar Association, which even back then was a famously hostile forum. And in that speech, General Meese spoke truth. He argued that the Supreme Court was grievously wrong. It was wrong about religious freedom. It was wrong about federalism. It was wrong about free speech. It was wrong about criminal procedure, and on and on and on the general went. Now, I've gone back and I've reread that speech, and there are no minced words in it. There's no on the one hand, on the other hand. There's no hemming and hawing about how, well, maybe Chief Justice Warren was right about this or that. At the risk of dating myself, it was all Hannity and no Combs. And that was a feature, not a bug. That speech became the rallying cry for generations of conservative lawyers, and it remains on the Federalist Society's website to this day. And alongside it, the Society's website says that the purpose of this organization is to promote awareness of conservative legal principles, yes. And then it goes on to say, quote, to further their application, end quote. That is, the point has never been only to expose people to ideas, or to debates. It's to further the application of the ideas and the principles we're here to discuss, and to do it in real and practical ways, just as General Mies did. So that's peril one of a big tent Federalist Society, is it's not exactly what it was ever intended to be. Peril two is that if FedSoc is home to everyone, query whether it's really home to anyone. I am sure we all remember when Justice Kagan, in her confirmation hearing, she famously said, "We're all originalists now." Well, if we're all originalists in Justice Kagan's sense, then is originalism really that important? Is saying, "I'm an originalist," any different than saying, "I'm a lawyer"? And if originalism really is that capacious, why come to this event instead of an ABA event or an ACS event? The answer, of course, is that originalism is important. Originalism does yield clear and objective answers. And anyone who equates FedSoc and ACS is, to borrow the president's matchless prose, fake news. So if FedSoc is special and different, as at least it should be, it bears remembering the principles that make it a one-of-a-kind organization. My third and final concern with a big tent debating society is that many of the important debates have been won. Back in the day, debate could play an important role in just getting people to hear both sides. But today, we've already heard a lot from both sides. And many of the old debates are tired at best, and they are over at worst. Textualism won. Originalism, at least some form of it, won. So to the extent that we are still debating them, we're often debating questions on the margins and questions that interest folks who are already committed textualists and originalists. And it's not just the theoretical debates that have been settled. The number of living precedents from the Burger Court are falling almost as fast as the number of illegal border crossings. Roe, Lemon, Chevron, Backey, Mapp, Bivens, a mountain of habeas precedent. All of these have either been replaced or narrowed to the point that no member of the Burger Court would recognize them. In taking stock of these developments, we should ask, does anyone worry that these debates have been resolved correctly? If you are worried, then I am worried about you. And if you're not worried, then what is the harm in admitting that some debates have run their course? Even the Yale Political Union, the debating society that birthed FedSoc, ends its debates by taking the yeas and nays. So query whether it is time to vote the yeas and nays on some of the old debates and to focus at least a little more on applying originalist legal principles in practical and timely ways. So much for the debates of the past. Let's talk for a few minutes about the present. Perhaps many of you, like me, think less about the battles that have already been won and more about the victories that remain frustratingly out of reach. There is much, much work left to do. Now is not the time to lose focus. Now is not the time to hide behind relativism and agnosticism of a purportedly value-neutral debating society. So what time is it? Well, in my view, it is time to reconsider the role for a debating society in a society where debaters are murdered. It is time to look around and realize how special the present circumstances are, and to look for new ways to put principles into practice. Charlie Kirk understood the distinction between debates, principles, and practices. He traveled around the country, he visited campuses that made the MSNBC studios look moderate. He would stake out as a conservative position steeped in the Judeo-Christian tradition that has defined our country since its founding. And then he would debate all comers, and he would do it in ferocious defense of values and moral clarity. But debates only work when both sides are willing to listen and to speak to each other critically. Debates only work when people are willing to talk to each other in good faith. And debates only work when we share certain foundational principles. Principles like facts don't care about your feelings. Principles like the rule of law over the rule of man. And principles like you do not get to pick up a .30-06 hunting rifle and shoot someone when you hear something you disagree with. Throughout our history, and even in times of deep division, Americans have been able to agree on these premises. And as a result, many of America's finest moments revolved around political debate. Think Webster Hayne, Clay Calhoun, Lincoln Douglas, Free Silver, Cross of Gold, Gore Vidal versus William Buckley, the kitchen debate between Richard Nixon and Nikita Khrushchev. America was literally born out of debate, from the Constitutional Convention and the vehement disagreement between the Federalists and their anti-Federalist foes. All of these debates were ferociously principled. Did Brutus, my favorite anti-Federalist, decry the dangers of the new Constitution to satisfy an intellectual lark? Did Ronald Reagan harbor some relativistic indifference between capitalism and communism when he took on Gorbachev? Of course not. The entire point of these debates was to convince listeners in disparate environments with radically different audiences, and FedSoc was founded to carry on this proud tradition. At some point, however, I'm worried that at least some have started to, that the world has started to change and that some have missed the message. I'm worried that at least some conservatives have started majoring in the minors. They became so focused on a big tent that they lost focus on the principles that motivated all of this in the first place. The instinct to debate all things somehow started to mean that all things can be debated and should be debated without end. And the targets of conservative outreach somehow decided that conservatives are the targets. And I worry that the upshot of all of this is asymmetrical. One side of a debate is trying to play nice, while the other side is playing for keeps. Now, in a world like that, it seems to me that the first and most important thing is to be very, very clear about what you believe. Articulate the principle first. If you are surrounded by violence, violent rhetoric, and anger, you should at least be clear about what you believe and why you believe it, because otherwise, there is no way to know that the risks of the present day are worth it. This is one of the reasons that I agonize over my judicial work. Of course, I know that literally none of my critics will ever read it. If anyone is going to read anything, they're going to read some rage bait headline on X and then fly off the handle. But I get an awful lot of hate mail and an awful lot of threats. And I think there's at least some chance that at least one of those really angry folks will read something that I write. And if, heaven forbid, a rage-filled lunatic were to try to hurt me or my family, I want to be 100% sure that I did at least the best that I could do to articulate a principle worth defending. So I write them down as clearly as my human frailties allow for all of the world to see. The importance of clearly articulated principles is as old as law itself. In Caligula's Rome, the imperial government proclaimed all sorts of taxes, but did not publish them in writing. That sparked outrage because folks committed offenses without knowing the law. Caligula responded by publishing the taxes, the Roman historian Suetonius tells us, in a very narrow place and in excessively small letters, so that no one could see them. That way, most Roman citizens would continue not to know how much they owed. Now, as Justice Scalia famously explained, this Roman practice is fundamentally inconsistent with the rule of law. The entirety of law depends on written rules that everyone can read, so that we can know what is right, what is wrong, and where is the line. I would humbly submit that the entirety of the conservative legal movement depends on it too. We need clarity on what is right. We need clarity on what is wrong. And the movement can succeed only if it has some shared sense of what success means. Success can only be defined by restoring articulable principles. And unless you can say, this is the principle worth defending, then you cannot say, this is the debate worth having. So, show your colors and tell the world what you know to be true. One of the great things about being a textualist and an originalist is that you don't have to wonder what your principles are. Unlike Caligula's laws, ours are written in our nation's founding documents for all of the world to see. So the challenge for our present time is not so much identifying the relevant principles, and increasingly, it's not really debating the relevant principles either. Rather, the challenge of our present time is putting those principles into practice. Or as the Society's mission statement puts it, the question is how to further their application. By way of illustration, let's consider a few examples. The principles of national sovereignty and territorial integrity have been firmly established at least since the end of the 30 Years' War in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. What do those principles have to say about modern debates over immigration law and policy? Article 1, Section 1, the Constitution vests all legislative powers in one Congress. Does it further the application of that principle to have 90-some-odd% of all federal rules developed by administrative agencies? Article 2 vests the executive power in a singular president of the United States. So how should that principle apply to independent agencies like the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Trade Commission, which are responsible for executing federal laws often developed by those very same independent agencies and then used to put Americans into prison? Article 3 of the Constitution gives federal courts the power to adjudicate only certain cases and controversies. And adjudicating them, federal courts are supposed to be, in Hamilton's famous words, the least dangerous branch, which may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment. So how should those principles apply to modern conceptions of judicial supremacy? The Declaration of Independence holds these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How can those principles be put into practice when so many Americans believe that our rights exist only when our governments deign to recognize them? And if you think that government recognition of rights is important, the Bill of Rights certainly recognizes some of them: the right of free exercise of religion, the right to freedom of speech, the right to keep and bear arms. How should those principles apply to purportedly neutral laws that abridge those rights? And the 10th Amendment provides the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Have those principles now fallen into desuetude, and have the Anti-Federalists been proven right when year after year the several states are swallowed up by ever-increasing concentrations of power in this city? These are just a few questions, just a few examples. Maybe you like them, maybe you hate them. Honestly, that doesn't matter for the present purpose. Rather, my point is that debating these principles for debate's sake accomplishes little and is arguably counterproductive. These principles are written clear as day in the history that undergirded our founding. No one should need to convincing that these are our national commitments. And if someone does need convincing of that obvious truth, it is unclear that the present debating environment, prone as it is to violence and threats of violence, is amenable to it. So perhaps, just perhaps, it is time for a little less debate and a little more clarity. Or maybe just the clarity and keep the debate. Perhaps it's time to focus on applying these principles rather than just debating them amongst ourselves. Perhaps when you're planning FedSoc events or attending them, we should think less, food for thought, and more, yeah, let's do that thing. And perhaps it's time to recognize that the no positions mantra can sometimes obscure truth instead of revealing it, and it can sideline conservative, originalist principles rather than making them a reality. We've started to see this in real time, even this week. And we've seen panels that have had moral clarity. We have seen panels that have declared the ends of debates about big and important Supreme Court cases. And more of that would be welcome. Finally, let's talk about the tent of the future. Many of my friends and mentors who have been in the Federalist Society a lot longer than me might say all of this is nonsense. The no positions mantra is an important FedSoc tenet. It's part of what makes the society special. It makes the society nonpartisan. It prevents the society from getting embroiled in the fleeting furors that dominate this town. The no positions mantra builds a big tent, and it allows us to have annual dinners that are so insanely popular that Union Station apparently could not hold us, so we had to move to a ballroom that is bigger than the median city in my home state of Texas. Why would anyone, you might ask, want to deny that success or change something that is not broken. Again, do not misunderstand me. Far from denying FedSoc's successes, I celebrate them. I would never suggest that the society should get anywhere close to partisan politics, and I am not suggesting that FedSoc should traffic in the stuff of 15-minute news cycles. It would be crazy for the society to start issuing press releases, and I feel confident speaking for Sheldon, that he should not be sent out to do press conferences. And I hope nothing I have said tonight could be construed by even the most liberal and the most dishonest journalist or law professor as saying that we should stop debating. If we take nothing from the assassination attempts against President Trump and Justice Kavanaugh, and if we take nothing from the cold-blooded act of terrorism committed against Charlie Kirk, it's that we should be fearless in preaching truth. And sometimes the fearless defense of truth requires debating those who would deny it. But my gentle admonition for you tonight is that nobody should never mistake a debate over truth with a debate for truth. There is right, there is wrong, and the desire to welcome everyone, to have a big tent, should never obscure that. Because if you are not careful, big tentism could turn FedSoc into a right of center bar association, where folks come to meet and eat, to see and be seen, all in service of some vaguely conservative or traditional norm that's unarticulated and inarticulable. Rather, it is okay to read our founding documents, identify their enduring principles, and then cry foul when they're violated. If we really believe that originalism provides clear answers, and it does, then we should not shy away from promoting them, and we should not shy away from actually applying them in the world around us. Part of applying those principles is recognizing violations of them. You should not wince with discomfort when someone says, such and such court got this wrong, or so-and-so said or did something outrageous. Nor should you wince when your favorite newspaper, TV show, podcast, or dare I say, your favorite judge is the subject of originalist criticism. Criticism is part and parcel of the law. It is part and parcel of what this society has always been, and it is part and parcel of applying legal principles to the world around us. Well, hold on a second, you might say. Won't that make the tent smaller? Is it possible that next year we could only have 2,000 or heaven forbid 1,000 people at the dinner? Well, maybe, but maybe not. So let's think about the maybe for a second. It's always possible that a principled stand can make you lonely. I can imagine Justice Scalia was lonely when he dissented alone in Morrison, Mistretta, and Meade. And it will always be the case that truth will turn off some people. On the margin, some people are so sensitive to criticism that they will throw temper tantrums, walk out, or quit when someone questions their views or values. Or when someone says, hey, I'm not sure that this or that decision or doctrine or article is consistent with originalist principles. But ask yourself, is the point of all of this to generate a product that placates such marginal folks? Is the point to make everyone feel accepted? Is the point to foster discussions that are so unthreatening that no one ever has to question their own views? Or is the point of all of this to preach unapologetically, to foster the application of originalist principles, and to level criticism when justified, even when it is supposedly one of our own who's the target of the criticism? If the principles are above all of us, then none of us is above the criticism. So yes, when it turns to applying principles instead of just debating them, it is possible that the tent gets smaller. But if it does, why is that a bad thing? And besides, I am also not convinced that the tent will shrink, because those who might leave will be dwarfed by those who will come. Truth and principle are attractive. They are magnetic even. And if you doubt that, just look at FedSoc's history itself. This society was founded on fearless, principled criticism of the then prevailing status quo. And while the tent started small, it is now so big that the Washington Hilton cannot contain it. I will leave you with this tonight. My life in public service is inspired by and dedicated to my grandfather, Richard Thomas Oldham. He was so devoted to this country and its greatness that he lied about his age to convince an Army recruiter to enlist him on the day after Pearl Harbor. He served in the Army, and the Army Air Corps, and the United States Air Force. He flew hundreds of missions in World War II and Korea before retiring during the Vietnam War. If you know anything about the early days of America's flying forces, you know that mortality rates were really high back then. And members of our greatest generation spent a lot of time writing condolence letters to widows and to orphans. And my grandpa never wanted to forget why the costs of war were worth it, and why the Nazis and Imperial Japan had to be defeated no matter the cost. So while he flew around in defense of Western civilization, he carried 2 books in his cockpit: the King James Bible and the United States Constitution. America is the greatest nation this world has ever known, and it was built on faith and foundational premises that require constant, bold defense. The principles my grandpa fought for are under unrelenting attack today. So yes, the risks for conservatives are quite high, but so too are the opportunities. The promises and the premises of the founding remain visible, even if only faintly. And it is up to each of us to see those principles, to defend them, and to apply them boldly, without apology, and without fear. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Oldham. I had the honor of knowing Barbara Olson a little bit, and I'm certain that she'd be well pleased to have her name associated with notions of fearlessness and truth and moral clarity. So this fits in well with those themes. So thank you very much. Another round of applause for Judge Oldham. We're going to move now to 2 events. I'm not sure one of them is on your schedule, so pay attention, please. And I urge you to go to this event, which is a short film screening, 13-minute film that will be screened by Judge Douglas Ginsburg of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Will also feature the judge taking questions and discussing his contribution to this piece. It will also feature the same food and beverage you can get in the other event, which is the reception up the stairs. So Judge Ginsburg will be in the cabinet room on the concourse level, the reception straight up the stairs, and we'll see you in the morning. Thank you very much, everyone.